women in history never heard of, and wouldn't be surprised if you haven't either. Today, let's talk about Beryl Markham. Beryl Markham was born in 1902 and passed in 1986. She's probably best known for crashing an airplane, but that's not all she did. Beryl's dad moved the family from England to Kenya when Beryl was about 3. 18 months later, her mom went back home with Beryl's brother. I didn't find a concrete reason why she didn't take Beryl, but Beryl never forgave her. In Kenya, her dad bred and trained thoroughbred racehorses. She learned to ride before she could even walk, but he cared more about raising the horses than raising his own daughter. So local folks took over. In fact, her first language was not English. It was Swahili. Those folks let her hunt and compete with local boys. She was just as good, if not better, as they were. One source said she was more afraid of love than leopards. I'm thinking they should have said lions. See, because when she was about 11, she was at a neighbor's with her dad. As per usual, she ran off to explore. The neighbors kept a lion on their property, which they'd had since he was a cub. So of course he was tame. She ran past him, just like always, right before he attacked her from behind. A servant saved her, then ran to tell her dad she'd been moderately eaten by the big lion. Moderately eaten. Nothing. She apparently came out of it with minor injuries. Well, survive a lion mauling probably makes you feel a little invincible. Dad eventually tried to send her away for formal English schooling. She was expelled after about 2 years because she tried to organize an uprising with her fellow students. Bad influence and all. Beryl's dad didn't seem to be very good with money. When she was 16, he was headed into a very public bankruptcy. So he married her off to a much older neighbor. She did not like that. Fucking duh. And by the time she was 18, she was single and training racehorses herself. Her skill at handling them became legendary. She also became the first licensed woman racehorse trainer in Africa. In 1927, she married her second husband. 2 years later, they had a son, her only child. They got divorced the same year he was born, and he was raised by Beryl's mother-in-law. Beryl was not a good mother. Couldn't be the example she had. No. A couple sources did say that dude divorced her because of rumors that a certain English prince was actually her son's father. After that divorce, she met a man called Tom Campbell Black and discovered a love of flying. He was an accomplished pilot and taught her everything he knew. By her late 20s, she was the first Kenyan-trained pilot to get a commercial license. Once she went solo, she went into business. She delivered mail, was a taxi, took hunters out to where she knew big game would be found. Medical services, you get the picture, right? But then, she realized no woman had ever crossed the Atlantic from Europe to America. Oh sure, Lindbergh and Earhart had done it. From America to Europe. They had the wind at their backs, pushing them. She would be flying into the wind, fighting it. On September 4th, 1936, after a 3-day delay due to weather, Beryl took off from England. The weather still wasn't great, and her plane wasn't exactly meant for long-distance travel, especially over an ocean. But she and her team had outfitted the plane with extra fuel tanks. The problem with those? No gauge. She had to let one tank run dry, close a valve, then open the valve on another. If she opened one before closing the other, airlock, and she'd lose her engine. At one point, she did. She was falling towards the ocean. She started wondering just how high the waves would reach. She worked frantically to restart the engine. Her fingers were cut. Blood dripped on her map, on her clothing. Eventually, the engine did restart. But she never knew just how close she got to the waves. So her goal was landing in New York. Unfortunately, the plane failed again, and Beryl went tail up, nose down, into a peat bog in Nova Scotia. She walked away with a head wound. Must have been that invincibility from the lion. Anyway, from there, she did make it to New York, but she didn't consider her flight a success because she hadn't landed where she intended to. New York changed her mind. They welcomed her as a hero. Now, during World War II, Beryl joined the Civil Air Patrol and flew lookout along the coast of California. Also in California, she worked as a consultant on movie sets regarding Swahili and Africa. Also in California, she met her third husband. All evidence said they were happy, and while they were together, she wrote her memoirs. Hubby was a talented editor, so she had him edit it. use the resources you got. Her book was called West with the Night and was published in 1942. It did pretty well, but World War II sent it to obscurity. Eventually, her hubby's drinking got way out of control, and she went back to Africa, back to training thoroughbreds. Then that hubby started spreading rumors that he had written her book because she was illiterate and too promiscuous to have done it. She was not, in fact, illiterate, but she was promiscuous. Remember, more afraid of love than leopards? Fortunately, Beryl met Ernest Hemingway in the 1930s. He read her book and said it was a masterpiece. Unfortunately, nobody figured that out until 1982, when George Gutekunst found a collection of Hemingway's letters, and he got her book reprinted. It sold marvelously. By the time she passed, it had sold more than 100,000 copies. A biographer called Mary Lovell met with Beryl before she passed. Through old materials and Beryl's own words, she was able to prove that Beryl's ex-husband did not write her memoirs. He was just butthurt, wanted her to pay. His rumors haunted her for a long time. But I've said it before, the truth shall out. One source said, Beryl died a wealthy woman, but not a happy one. Maybe because her mom abandoned her. Maybe because her dad did too. Maybe because nobody ever measured up to her standards. Or maybe she didn't give a fuck about what other people thought she should do. And instead, she chose to go west with the night.